Hey guys, how's it going? So, I just want to discuss briefly tonight this new document that's been leaked that is believed to be the document that Attorney General Bill Barr is carrying around with him as he's meeting with all of our different senators, some of the representatives, and people just in general in the Capitol for this new background check that the Department of Justice is proposing. So, basically, here's the document right here. I'm going to put a link in the description. It's not signed by anybody, but this is supposed to be the document that Bill Barr himself is carrying around and reading to people, and this is the gun control that he wants to support. So basically what this does is this is to do with what they call so-called universal background checks and this stupid, ridiculous gun show loophole, which I'll explain doesn't really exist anyways. So it basically starts off, saying that under the federal background checks, under the current law, we have federal background checks that are required for firearm transfers through licensed FFLs. And that detailed information about the transfer is captured on a Form 4473, which I'll address that in a second, and that the FFL must maintain this for 20 years. What this does, though, is it goes on to say, consistent with the Manchin-Toomey draft legislation, which, by the way, those were universal background checks. That's what Manchin-Toomey is. It doesn't say this right here, but I just wanted to remind you guys. Manchin-Toomey is, if you want to loan your nephew your shotgun to go deer hunting, that would be legally need to be transferred. So when they mention Manchin-Toomey, yeah, that's a straight-up universal background check, which would forbid people from loaning a gun to their nephew that they know and trust just to go hunting with, or to one of your best friends that you know and trust to just simply borrow your gun to go out to the range and shoot and enjoy. So anyways, consistent with the Manchin-Toomey draft legislation, a background check requirement would be extended to all advertised commercial sales, including sales at gun shows. I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm going to include a link to this, down below the video where you guys can read this for yourself. But basically what they're saying here is this: that they're going to create this new type of entity called a licensed transfer agent who would not carry firearms like an FFL, but they would have access to the NICS system and they would be able to run instant background checks. So right now you need to go to an FFL for that. Well, an FFL has a license to carry and sell firearms. So they're saying there would be a new type of legal entity that people could become or apply for where they can just do background checks but not necessarily own a gun shop. And like any other federal entity, this is going to obviously have fees, paperwork, a bunch of government overreach. It seems like every time they want to solve a problem, they add more and more laws, right? Even though if you look back, when our country was at its purest and its freest, and we had true liberty in this country, we had very, very few laws. But for some reason in Washington, and we know the reasons why, but for some reason, they keep on thinking that they're going to keep adding more and more laws, and that is going to somehow make us more free and give us more liberty, right? So this would be, a new law that would allow a new type of entity to exist, and these people would simply be licensed transfer agents. Now, they're saying that somebody for these background checks could go through a regular FFL, which we've had for years, and do a regular 4473, or they could go to the transfer agent to conduct a background check before completing transfer, and they would generate two forms. So that's what I was talking about earlier. More paperwork, more forms, and I'll let you guys decide, but in my opinion, a registry, which is what we know they were after the whole time with background checks, is a registry. And I would hope that it would never happen in this country, but it's hard to be optimistic because if you look at any country who's ever had a registry, it's ultimately led to confiscation and more strict gun control. So it says that the two forms that they would generate would be a bill of sale / chain of title. This form would record the details of the sale, including the identities of the buyer and the seller, and be the seller's responsibility. I think it's kind of curious how they use the word title. Look at what else we own that has titles. Cars and trucks, automobiles, right? Well, what goes along with your title for your vehicle? Obviously your registration. So I don't know if they picked this word on purpose, but I think they did. They're trying to make it where it's like how cars are, where they're titled and then registered with the government, of course. And then a new form certification. This form would be certification from the FFL or transfer agent memorializing a successful background check, including the serial number, date, and confirmation code. It could also include the seller's identity. And background checks would be conducted based on the same information as a Form 4473. And they're basically saying sellers could retain these records on their own, but many would be expected to choose voluntarily to have the FFL or transfer agent store the records. So this is kind of a little bit hard to understand here. They're wording it this way on purpose, though. Sellers could retain these records on their own, but many would be expected to choose. So if you're expected to do something, that doesn't necessarily sound like voluntary, but then right afterwards they say voluntary. Voluntarily to have the FFL or transfer agent store the records. So if you're expected to do something that's, and it's underlined here, voluntarily, oh, what do you guys think about that? The record keeping requirements would be enforced via civil penalties. Oh, there's the kicker right there. So this is completely voluntary, right? But you're expected to do it, and if you don't, then there's a penalty. Would be enforced via civil penalties. Also, if a firearm were used in a crime, the seller would enjoy the same civil immunity as FFLs if he could produce the forms from his own records or from those retained by the FFL or transfer agent. So they're doing two things here. They're making it sound like it's voluntary, but yeah, it's voluntary, but if you don't do it, then there's going to be a penalty. So just like it's voluntary whether you want to choose to stop for a red light or not, right? It's technically voluntary. You can run it, but if you run the red light, now you're going to get a penalty and a fine. So this is completely voluntary. Just if you don't do it, you're going to get fined, right? And it says that, but don't worry though. And this is where this always comes into play. They always try to scare you where first you have to be afraid of something bad happening. Then you're going to call somebody to come to your rescue, right? And here we are, Uncle Sam. We're here to protect you. Don't worry, we have your back. Because if you were worried that if you sold a firearm and it was used in a crime, don't worry, we will offer you a civil immunity if you can produce the forms and records from those retained by the FFL or transfer agent. So they're basically saying, look, if you sell a lawfully owned piece of property to somebody else and somebody else uses that in a crime, right, that wasn't you, don't worry, you won't get in trouble for what somebody else did as long as you have proper records. Look, you already don't get in trouble if you didn't commit a crime. So the idea that you should be scared that if somebody else commits a crime that you could be in trouble unless you keep these records, I don't know, doesn't sit too well with me. I think it's kind of crazy, you know? And here's the thing here too. Sorry guys about my voice. I've been cutting a ton of grass the last couple days and there's pollen everywhere right now. It's kind of messing with my allergies. But there's kind of this notion too, and I wanted to touch on this briefly, that we don't have background checks in this country. And there's this gun loophole. Well, first of all, I find a lot of people out there to be ignorant on this topic. Now, I'm not calling them inherently stupid. I'm trying to use the word ignorant properly. Ignorant as in you don't even know what you don't know. Like if you've never bought a gun, how would you know? Well, for those of you that have never bought a gun, or for those of you that are dealing with people like I do around here that have never bought a gun that say we don't have background checks, yes, we do. And the background checks are done through this form right here. Now, this is a federal document called the Firearms Transfer Record, also known as the Federal ATF Form 4473. So we can see right here, ATF E-Form 4473. You can look this up. You can print this. I just printed it totally free of charge right off the ATF's website. And look at this thing. This is a comprehensive form. And if I need to, I'll do a whole video on this form. But we have every bit of personal information on here. Information that most people can't even ask you. Like, they have every right apparently on this form. And I'm using that sarcastically. I don't think they have the right to ask all these questions. But according to this form, they even have the right to ask you what your race is, what's your ethnicity, what color your skin is. Like literally, I'll read you right here, 10A, ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino. Or are you not Hispanic or Latino? Now, what's your race? Are you American Indian or Alaska Native? Are you Asian? Are you Black or African American? Are you Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander? Or are you white? Now, I thought that everybody's rights are supposed to be equal, and that's how I believe they are. I don't think you're supposed to take somebody's race or the color of their skin into account, whether they can exercise their civil rights. I believe God-given rights are given to all human beings, and that we're all equal under the eyes of God. And when you're talking God-given rights, why does it matter what color your skin is or what race you are? But they ask this, okay? And there's all these questions about your criminal background, your address, where you were born, your city and state, your height, your weight, your sex, whether you're male or female, your birth date. I mean, everything's on here, guys. You know, you have to continue on to sign it and date it. And then there's this whole slew of questions that the FFL has to answer. All this information, all the specifics about the firearm itself. More stuff, fields for, you know, detailed manufacturers, importers, marks, serial numbers, models, types of guns, caliber or gauge, you know, signed again. And then there's even 3 pages of instructions on this because, you know, you can't have any government paperwork that's not extraordinarily long and overly complicated. So this is the background check that we have. And by the way, if you go to a gun show, look, here's what happens. Dealers pick up their items out of their shop. They run a booth or tables at a gun show. And when they go to sell guns, commercial sales of guns, this same form is right here. You know, some of them bring like their mobile hotspot and do it online right there at the table. Some of them pick up their cell phone and call, you know, the 1-800 number for the ATF, you know, or the FBI, depending on your state. Sometimes it's the state police that act as an agent of the FBI. Sometimes it's the actual FBI. It varies by state. But no matter what, anywhere in the United States, they're using this form at a gun show if they're doing commercial sales. Now, I say that because I'm going back to where it says in this little memorandum by the Attorney General that, you know, that consistent with the Manchin-Toomey legislation, a background check requirement be extended to all advertised commercial sales, including sales at gun shows. Look, guys, if you're doing advertised commercial sales at a gun show, you have to be a registered FFL to be advertising commercial sales, and you have to use this. So we already have a very comprehensive background check that happens at all gun shows. So this gun show loophole, as they're talking about, doesn't really exist. Now, sure, I'll give the other side of the story. If I happen to meet another guy there and we start to talking, what are you into? Well, I'm into Mosin Nagants. I'm into Mausers. Hey, man, do you have an extra Mosin? Yeah, I do. Do you want to buy it off me? Yeah. Okay, are you good to go? Do you have anything that would prohibit you? And you talk to them and everything seems legit? Yeah, you can go meet them out in the parking lot, or you can meet them at home later on or whatever and sell them a gun. That's just called a face-to-face sale of 2 law-abiding, you know, trustworthy individuals. That's just our rights to own property and to transfer property in this country. That has nothing to do with 4473s. Now look, if I bring in my private collection to a gun show and I advertise myself, this is the 2A EDU gun shop, and I do all of that, but I'm not a licensed FFL, and I don't, you know, do these 4473s, I could already go to prison for doing that. And for these reasons, I would never even consider that. I'm just giving you guys an example. So this gun show loophole is a huge myth. If there's, you know, illegal people out there that are, you know, committing federal offenses, pretending to be gun shops that aren't at gun shows, well, then there's already many, many laws on the books that they can fully prosecute and fine these people exorbitant amounts of money and or send them to prison for a long time. So we don't need any law for that. It's already against the law for somebody to fake that they're a gun business. But if you are a legit business, and I've bought guns at gun shows many times before, and anytime I've ever bought a gun at a gun show, I filled out this exact form and had the thorough background check and all of the record keeping and all of the rigmarole. So I'm getting sick and tired of people talking about how there's this whole gun show loophole. There is no gun show loophole. This loophole they want to close is basically to prohibit you from being able to lawfully transfer property that's completely legal to own. Completely legal to own to somebody else who's completely legal to own it. That's what they're after. And just like they said earlier, that one of these new pieces of paperwork they want would be a title, which, again, you have the title to your car, and then you have your registration. This is just another fancy way to word it, that they want a comprehensive registration scheme. And when you register something, just to put it quite bluntly, the government knows what you have. The same government that you don't trust, the same government that usually knows a lot about these really bad things before they happen, but fail to act, or somebody didn't feel like doing it, or the paperwork got lost on someone's desk. Yeah, this is the same government, okay? So, just more information for them to have, more for us to be forced to trust our government, just to exercise one of our rights that the government never gave to us. And therefore, since they didn't give us our right to keep and bear arms, they can't take it away. And I want to reiterate that one more time. So many people, somehow today, I don't know if it's, public school education. I don't know what it is. That's a topic for another night. But there's so many people, good people, reasonably smart people, that somehow believe that the United States of America, or the Founding Fathers, or George Washington, or Alexander Hamilton, or Ben Franklin, well, although they were great people, they think that they gave us the right to keep and bear arms. Look, the government didn't give us anything. God gave us these rights to protect ourselves that are enumerated throughout the Bill of Rights. The fact that they were written down is strictly to prohibit the government from treading on them. So I don't want to trust the government and give them more authority on rights that they have no right to dictate, because they're not the ones that gave them to me, so they have no right whatsoever to regulate them, restrict them, or tread on them, or infringe on them. Alright guys, I'll probably talk about this more coming up here on my stream this Friday, but just wanted to get it out there. If you just kind of gloss over it, it might not look quite so bad, but start reading the details. Read what the Mansion to me really is. Start to notice how things appear to be voluntary at first, unless or until you decide not to do it, and then there's penalties. Look, you guys are just as smart as me. Most of you are smarter than me. Read this thing carefully before you completely dismiss it. And one more thing I'm going to end on here. Why the heck is the Attorney General, the chief law enforcement person in the country, right? Why is he proposing laws? I thought we elect people to our Senate, our upper chamber, and to the People's House, the lower chamber of Congress. I thought we elect these people who live in our communities and live in our states, and they're the ones that create law. I thought Congress creates law, and the executive signs laws, and through his branches, such as the Department of Justice, enforces laws. That's the way this country's supposed to work. And then we have, obviously, our judicial that would interpret a law if it's vague or decide if it's unconstitutional or not. I don't know. I'm a little troubled about the fact that our law enforcement is so ready and willing to try to put forth legislation, because that's not their job at all. They're paid to enforce the law that the people's elected representatives put in place. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and have a good one.